Sex Pistols, the British punk rock group that began their first American concert tour last night in Atlanta. And Jack Perkins was there.
The publicity that preceded the Sex Pistols to America said they spat on audiences, vomited on stage, sang of anarchy. Those were the things that had made them famous. And here they are, at least two of them in a hotel room in Atlanta, waiting for the other two to do a promised interview. But they're in a strange mood, flaky, demanding they be paid $10 before they'll do any bleep interview. Denied that, they stomp off. Bleep, they say. Whether naturally or calculatedly so, the four young men are outrageous. They are also vile and profane. This is a hotel room they used here in Atlanta. A hotel employee who left after being insulted muttered, "Who would pay to see them?" When the four young men left, their spit was on the carpet, their butts on the floor, the dregs of an afternoon's beer and booze, and a couple of empty boxes of Clearasil. They left the hotel to go to a sex devices store, and then to their first concert in America. First, let it be reported the concert was a sellout. Second, notice that the concert hall only holds 500. Annette Funicello singing a medley from Beach Blanket movies could fill that hall. The kinds of people the Sex Pistols attracted? All kinds. All kinds. Some aficionados of the raucous rebellion that is called punk rock. Punk began in Britain. This, the first big British punk band to come to America to see if it can happen here. Well, this is it. Punk. The Sex Pistols. The lead singer, actual name John Lydon, stage name Johnny Rotten. Bassist, called Sid Vicious. Others, straight names, Steve Jones, Paul Cook. Lyrics that may cry of anarchy, but as here rendered, screeched, who could tell? Again, attention on the punks who come to hear punk. Putting safety pins through the cheek is chic. Impression of Johnny Rotten. In the pallor of his skin and the haunted stare of his eyes, he looks like a reincarnated Gary Gilmore. Impression of the music. It is inexpressibly loud, totally unmelodic, primal, driving. It is as ugly as the young men make themselves. But these aren't my impressions. After the concert, we got some other people's. It was good.
Fantastic.
And rotten. Did you like it? They were good. Real hot.
The fact is,
Minor.
No, they're not half as hardcore as people really expected. I mean, America was so scared to let them into the States. There's nothing to be scared about. I mean, Johnny Rotten, it's just another band.
Well, what more can be said? In the past, there have been groups who were shocking and outrageous enough to get attention. Elvis Presley, the Beatles themselves. And they lasted because they had the musical worth to last. Well, Johnny Rotten and the Sex Pistols are outrageous enough to get attention, and that's about all that's been proved so far. Jack Perkins, NBC News, Atlanta, Georgia.
As I understand it, however, the fellows were surprisingly tame in performance. When they performed for 45 minutes, about the most disgusting thing they did. Johnny Rotten, blew his nose on stage a lot, and people in the audience paid $3.50 for the privilege of seeing it.
In their home country of Great Britain, they were banned from the BBC earlier this year when we were there covering the Silver Jubilee of Queen Elizabeth because of a song that they were singing that was very popular at the time, high on the charts. People were listening to it and buying the records. It was called God Save the Queen and Her Fascist Regime. That was one of them. I know a man who owns a rock...
Doo-dah.
Right, doo-dah, doo-dah. I know a man who owns a rock club in London, and he says it is a real dilemma for him because punk rock has become popular among his clientele of young people, and yet when they book a punk rock group of one kind or another, they can count on sheer mayhem. And so what he did was just throw them out of the club when they began to make outrageous demands and bust up the furniture and pour beer on the customers and so on. I think this very group, in fact. You may wonder why we, if they are so disgusting, as Jane so aptly put it, why we put them on the air. Well, it is one of those phenomena that come along from time to time, and whether we paid any attention to them or not, they would probably get an audience as they did last night, and attention as they have for almost a year now in their own country. And it did become embroiled in United States Immigration Services because they were denied a visa originally about whether or not they could come here and perform.
You got to figure we might have saved somebody in our viewing audience $3.50.
All right, thanks for joining me on another episode of Why Not Go, the channel dedicated to rock and roll, especially punk, and especially the Sex Pistols. Last year in January, I uploaded a video about this tour, the Sex Pistols American Tour. And if you haven't seen the video I did a year ago on this tour, I'll put a link in the description. And that was a personal video. I talked about my connection with the Sex Pistols, how I knew their American rep who had an office in LA, Rory Johnston. I took a jacket to Steve Jones in the summer of '77 and took back some press material from Sophie Richmond back to him. I missed seeing the Spots in August of '77, which was a big regret of mine. And that was a personal video about the Sex Pistols tour in January of 1978. And in this video, I'm doing a video on the tour in general, all the dates on the tour, not just the 3 dates that I went to. I went to 2 dates in Texas, very notorious gigs, and one in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And for this video, I'm using the information from this book. It's called 12 Days on the Road with the Sex Pistols. And you've probably seen, if you watch my videos, you've probably seen it on my shelf up here. It came out about 1990, and I recently reread the book. And it's written by Noel Monk and a journalist by the name of Jimmy Guterman, and I'll show a picture of Noel Monk here. On the tour, they called him Monk, and he was their American tour manager. He had a long career in rock and roll. He was the stage manager for Woodstock. He worked with Jimi Hendrix, with Bill Graham at the Fillmore East, and then he went on to manage the band Van Halen through their rise to fame. I think from 1979 to 1985, he managed them. So he was given the task to manage this tour. And yes, it began, I'm uploading this on January 5th, their first date in America. And I remember that clip that I just played from NBC on the Today Show. I thought Jane Pauley was very unprofessional, and I thought Tom Brokaw was okay though. And yes, I remember that very well. There was a lot of attention when they came to the U.S. and they were supposed to do more shows than they did. They were supposed to arrive earlier than 1978. They were supposed to arrive in December of '77, and but there was visa problems. I think with all the members, they had some problems because of criminal offenses. Not just Steve Jones, but I think definitely Sid and maybe Johnny as well. I'm not sure, but their visas were delayed. And I'll just show a couple tickets here of some gigs that never happened, that should have happened. I feel sorry for the fans that bought these tickets. They were supposed to play at December 30th at the Leona Theater in Homestead, Pennsylvania. They were supposed to play December 31st, New Year's Eve, at the Ivanhoe Theater in Chicago, January 1st at the Agora Theater in Cleveland, and they were also supposed to play January 3rd at the Alexandria Rolling Rink. I love that. It's a rolling ice skating rink, maybe, in Alexandria, Virginia. And then they were going to go from there to Atlanta. So those gigs were all canceled. And they were supposed to also perform on Saturday Night Live, but and that was supposed to be also in December. And so that had to be canceled. And I read in Monk's book, as I said, it was very, very informative. He said that Malcolm wanted to keep the ticket prices really low. At first, he wanted them to be $2, and the record company, which was Warner Brothers, they had a big record company behind them in the States. They wanted the tickets to be much higher, and they compromised on a ticket price of $3.50. So all the tickets for the tour were $3.50, which is kind of mind-boggling when you think of prices today. And Malcolm, according to Monk, didn't want to bring them to New York for a couple reasons. He didn't want Sid around the New York crowd. He knew that was going to be bad for him with his drug problems. And he also said he wanted to play to working class America, and he didn't think that was going to be a New York City audience. And but he agreed to do Saturday Night Live, and that would have been amazing. That had to be canceled, and Elvis Costello filled in. And apparently Elvis Costello had a T-shirt on that night that said, "Thanks, Malk." So that's kind of funny. I'll show a couple pictures here. They arrived on January 3rd from Heathrow. First picture here is from Heathrow. And they got into JFK around 7 p.m. And then they flew out about 9 p.m. on a Delta flight straight to Atlanta. Malcolm wasn't with them. Malcolm flew in later, the day of the gig in Atlanta, January 5th. But they had Boogie with them, and the band, and obviously, and I'm not sure who else, but I know Boogie was with them. He was their roadie, and I think he did some sound work as well. And that interview that I just showed, that was taped on January 4th, the day before their first gig. And so they got in about 1 a.m. in Atlanta, and they and Monk met the band, and he didn't like Boogie right away, especially after the first night. He thought he was drinking too much, and Monk knew right away that Sid was going to be someone that he had to really keep a close eye on if he wanted the tour to be completed. There's a lot of graphic details in the book, and I'll get to them in a little bit. But yeah, they landed on early morning hours of January 4th, and then about sometime in the afternoon, I think about 2 p.m., they were staying they went to a downtown hotel, an upscale hotel, the West End, and they met with that reporter from the Today Show. And there wasn't much of an interview, or I guess wasn't any interview, because they wanted money for the interview, especially Sid, and Sid refused. And so these are a few pictures from not their hotel room, but when they were downtown for the supposed NBC interview that never really happened. And then the night of the 4th, it was kind of interesting. I love books that are written by not journalists necessarily, but people that were there. And Monk says right away he knew that Sid was going to be a problem, and he had great sympathy for him, though, and he wanted to, as I said, keep a close eye on him. So Boogie was supposed to room with Sid, and then Monk said, "No, I want to be his roommate on the tour. I want to stick close by them." And that night, after they did the interview, or the interview that never happened with NBC, they went back to their hotel. They were staying at a hotel called the Squire Inn or Squire Motel. It wasn't. He says it wasn't a super posh hotel at all. It was just outside of Atlanta. And then that night, Sid didn't go out. He was already kind of suffering from heroin withdrawal, and he stayed in the room with Monk, and Monk said that he gave him some Valium and to kind of calm him down. And Sid was just kind of drinking peach schnapps. I think on the whole tour he was drinking vodka and peach schnapps, and kind of surviving on Valium that Monk was giving him. And the other three went out to a nearby strip place. I think it was called Tattletales. And so that was the first night that they were in America. Sid just kind of stayed in bed with that evening with Monk, and stayed in the room, and the other three went out a little bit. And so their first gig, yes, it was January 5th, 1978. It's amazing that just 9 days later would be their last show. It was so sad. I still can't believe it. And yes, their first show was in Atlanta. It was at the excuse me, I'm just going to look at my notes. It was at the Great Southern Southeast Music Hall. The capacity was 523 people. Isn't that amazing? It was next to a Kmart. Looks like it was in a shopping mall. And I'll just show a brief clip here of that show. It's from the movie DOA, and as the other clips are. There's very few clips, very few recordings of this tour, which is amazing. I didn't bring a camera. You just didn't think of those things back then. And so this is a short clip from that night, their first gig. And the first fan that you see there was actually my roommate Sue, who I went to, not this gig, so it wasn't filmed at this gig. The short clip that you see of her was actually featured in the Hulu miniseries, and that was taken in Tulsa on January 11th. But anyway, you see a few fans late afterwards talking about that first show on January 5th at the Great Southern Southeast Music Hall in Atlanta.
Trouble we went through to get out here.
Fuck no, they're garbage, man. You know, they're garbage.
I like it for me, but I don't think I'd recommend it to anybody.
All I can say is, it was a vicious, rotten thing to do.
I've been living in Italy, and I feel like I really missed this whole movement.
I think I heard one time that they urinated on the audience one time. Why, I don't know. It just sounds goofy.
The pistols are just out of sight. I think they got a lot of balls.
It's about time we got some street fighting men here in America. It's about time we got someone to rile people up.
It's better than homework. It's better than a lot of stuff. I mean, you know, sometimes it's kind of boring in itself, but it's something to do.
That would be a Sex Pistols holster.
I think it was great. It was short and sweet, where I like it. Very loud, very energetic, and very nice.
Well, I thought when I saw Johnny Rotten's face, I thought I'd vomit. He's so beautiful.
Sex Pistols are using news the best way possible. I admire them for it because they've been factory workers. They grow up and do nothing unless they would use the news and use the media to make something of themselves. And that's finally what they're doing, and they deserve it. Y'all are taking pictures of people. They're doing things that normally doesn't happen, but you're making a big thing out of it. And that's what the Sex Pistols are using.
Those guys can't sing the worth of shit.
I love the Southern fans. I don't know, I just love their accents. But yes, that first girl you see there, that was my roommate Sue, who I went to 3 shows with. So the next gig they had was January 6th. But the night of January 5th did not go well because Sid went missing. I'll show a picture here of, there's a guy in the photo with a beard, and his name was Glenn Allison. And Monk knew that, his reputation was on the line. He was supposed to, make sure the band makes it to every show, and wanted to make sure that everything went off okay. And he knew that he was going to have to get extra security for Sid so that he wouldn't go missing. So he hired this gentleman here with you can see him in the photo with the beard, and his name is Glenn Allison. And his main duty on the tour was just to take care of Sid, watch Sid, make sure he doesn't run off, which he was prone to do. Well, he did run off after this first show. The rest of the band, I think they went off again, probably to some bars or strip clubs, the other three. Sid went running off. Glenn Allison was running after him, but he disappeared into the night. And apparently he had made a connection with someone at the show, someone that he knew he could get drugs from, and he went to their house. And he didn't have any money, but he got money because, and this is all according to Monk, he stole Rory Johnston's watch. By this point, Rory and Malcolm were on the tour, and he stole Rory's watch. I guess it was an antique watch that his father gave him, and he used the watch to trade for some, I'm assuming, heroin at this fan's house. And so Allison lost him that night. So the band, the next day, January 6th, they're supposed to all board a flight to Memphis. They flew to Memphis. I guess it's pretty far from Atlanta. They didn't want to take the bus. And they were all there at the airport, but Sid was nowhere to be found. But Allison did find him. I'm not sure what time he found him, but he did find him at some point the next day. And the reason why he found him was because Sid was booked into an Atlanta hospital. He had gone to this house, and that's when he started carving up his chest and writing the infamous "Give me a fix" on his chest. And I guess the people at the house were kind of worried about him, and they dumped him off at a hospital. And I guess Allison, the security guard, was phoning around the hospitals, and that's where he found him, at an Atlanta hospital. And so I'll show a picture here of Allison with Sid, and he was able to get him. I think he's on like an airport bus here, and he was able to get him in time to do the show in Memphis. I think he arrived, maybe around 6 o'clock or so. So he made the show. And one thing that Monk says in his book is that as chaotic as, the members were, especially Sid, that they really pulled it together when they got on stage. Apparently at the Memphis hotel, Sid was very agitated. He started fighting with another security man named EX. And but he said this show at the Taliesin Ballroom, apparently it's right down the road from Sun Studios, which I've been to in Memphis. And during that day when Sid was still missing, the other three members of the band actually went to Graceland. Back then you couldn't go into the house because Elvis had just recently passed away the year before, but apparently they went to Graceland. I think you could just go to the outside at that point. So they kind of saw some sights in Memphis. But yeah, they played the Taliesin Ballroom, and the capacity was 725, and apparently 1,200 tickets were sold. So the promoter got that wrong, and the police were outside. Monk said it was quite, the police had to be there so a riot didn't happen. So there was an intense interest in the band. This show was, well, more than sold out. So a lot of the people that bought tickets, I feel sorry for them. A lot of the people that bought tickets for the Memphis show didn't get in. So that's sad. But Monk said this was one of their better shows. He said that they were fantastic on stage. I mean, I thought they were fantastic in all three shows I saw. And And then around 2 a.m., they got on the bus. He said it was a very nice bus that he got for the band, tour bus. It had 6 sleeping compartments. And but at that point, and at 2 a.m., they left for San Antonio. They actually stayed in Austin, but the gig at Randy's Rodeo, that was the first one I went to. That was in San Antonio. I guess they're fairly close together in Texas. And so that's how they closed that night out, the first night. They left for San Antonio at 2 a.m. And there's quite a sad moment on the bus where Monk says that Sid asked him for some methadone. He said he was really suffering and just needed some methadone. And Monk was quite angry at the record company because he said that he phoned the record company rep and asked them, hey, I've got problems here. We're not going to be able to complete the tour. I have a bass player that's got a really bad drug problem, and can you get me some methadone? And he said the record company never got back to them, like they didn't care. And so he was upset about that. As I said, he knew that Sid was, if the tour wasn't going to finish, it would have been because of him. But he did finish it, amazingly. But I think he had great sympathy for Sid, and he was really sad that, and I feel sad for Sid, he felt really sad that the record company ignored his request for some methadone. So that's the way it ended on the second night of their tour on January 6th, in around 2 a.m. They were on their way to the third gig, which was at Randy's Rodeo in San Antonio. All right, so January 7th, they arrive in Austin, Texas. It's a 650-mile drive from Memphis to Austin. Texas is a very big state. It really, if you drive all the way across it, it takes a couple days. So they arrive about 2 p.m. at, as I said, at a Ramada Inn. And the rest of the band kind of does their own thing. And Monk is just kind of keeping company with Sid. He said that they slept a lot of the day, and then he and Sid walked around Austin a little bit. And so he kind of got, pretty close to Sid. As I said, I think he felt sorry for him because of his addiction and what he was going through. He said that whenever they pulled into a truck stop or a diner, Sid would always order steak and eggs and then promptly kind of throw up afterwards. He really couldn't hold any food down. He was, I think he was just kind of surviving on milkshakes and alcohol, and so he wasn't in a good state. But on this day, he said that Sid was in a pretty good mood, and they walked around. And as I said, he was rooming with Sid at this point because he wanted to kind of keep him close to him, and because it was his reputation as a tour manager if they missed a gig, so he really wanted to make sure that they were going to make every gig, and so he really was kind of stuck like glue to Sid. He did say on the drive, though, the overnight drive to Austin, that's when Sid started slicing his arms. And I'll show a picture here. You can see the gashes on his arms. And I think when I saw him play in San Antonio, I think they were bandaged up, which Monk did. He said he had to go to the first aid kit because they started getting infected, and he's had to pour alcohol on his wounds and then bandage him up. And he said an interesting thing. He said that he learned that with Sid, he tried to do things, shocking things like start slicing his arms. And if you acted more shocked, he continued doing it. But if you were blasé about it, he stopped. And so when Sid started slicing his arms, Monk just said, "Oh, okay, that looks like fun." And then Sid just stopped. So he was kind of already getting used to his personality and getting used to what would be the best way to manage him. So they spent the night January 7th, and then January 8th was their show at at the Randy's Rodeo, and that used to be a bowling alley where this show was. The capacity for Randy's Rodeo was actually pretty big. It was 2,200 was the capacity, and I remember it was pretty crowded. I would say it was like 3/4 crowded. So it was about 180 miles, I believe, from Austin to San Antonio. So sometime probably in the late afternoon on January 8th, they took the bus and went over to San Antonio for the third show, which was at Randy's Rodeo. And I'll show a clip here, also from the movie DOA, that shows this infamous gig where Sid hit the guy over the head with his bass.
Because I knew that he knew that I meant physical harm, and I have to say I was ugly about it. But he came out and hit us over the head with a bass. He was hitting us because I was going like this, come on, buddy, and he kept going like this. And I would have been glad to take him on or his buddy Johnny. I don't care either one, and so consequently I was taken out of the concert. I came here to openly cause dissent against the Sex Pistols because I believe negatively in what they're doing, and as far as I'm concerned, they're not worth killing.
I love that show. I mean, it was the first show that I saw, and I had to be in the back. Sue and I had to be in the back because we just couldn't believe all these cowboy types, I don't know, whatever you want to call them, that had come to the show. I remember thinking, like, why are they there? They hate the band. They're throwing full cans at them, and Steve was kind of bobbing right and left. And I love Johnny at this show. I mean, he was so defiant. And when they played New York, when he has that infamous line, "Poor little blank looking for a kiss," and he points at them in the front. I thought those guys in the front I thought they were actually going to jump the stage. I I thought it was going to be a full-on fight. So God knows what that guy was saying to Sid. He he might have deserved it. Those guys were all just looking for fights. I would say it was like 3/4 people that just hated the band, and I don't know what they thought. In Monk's book, he says that some people thought there was going to be like a live sex act on stage. They didn't, all this kind of misinformation, but that show, even through it all, it was fantastic. And I think I remember they had to stop the show for a while. I guess the guy was like taken out, and then they came back and finished the set. But I thought it was chaotic, and I had to be in the back because I didn't want to get hit. I mean, those guys kind of scared me, and it wasn't what I expected at all. But I thought it was a great show. They were on fire, and just a moment in history that I'll never forget, when the Sex Pistols really riled up the Deep South. It was great. So I'll show a few pictures here from that show of Sid getting his bass ready to clonk the guy over the head. Apparently, in Monk's book, he says that Sid at first hit one of the photographers, and so he didn't hit the guy he wanted to at first. He hit the wrong person, but then he got him. And then Monk says that there was a food fight afterwards, and I'll show pictures here. Sid with like food all over himself. But yeah, it was great. And Monk says as well that they were as messed up as Sid was. They all pulled it together when they had to be on stage. So at about 3 a.m. they had to leave for the drive to Baton Rouge, and that's about 500 miles. It was a strange tour because they went pretty far west going to San Antonio, then they had to backtrack and go back east, back across the Mississippi to Baton Rouge. And Monk says in his book that there was a point on the drive where they couldn't find Sid. Sid was missing, and he said to the driver, "Did you let him out?" And he said, "No, I didn't let him out." They couldn't find him, and then they looked in the bathroom, and Sid was on the toilet, just covered in vomit. He was asleep. So, but Monk was relieved that he hadn't sort of slipped out and disappeared in Texas somewhere. So that was the third gig, January 8th, and then they rolled on to Baton Rouge for the fourth gig on the tour. All right, so the fourth show they did was at the Kingfish Club, January 9th in Baton Rouge. So they drove most of the night from San Antonio to Baton Rouge. The Kingfish Club has a capacity of 800, so that was a small club. And I think of all the 7 places that they played, I think the Kingfish date is the one with sort of the least information. Very few. I'll show some photos here that I have, but there's not much information about this show as far as the other shows on the tour. And I couldn't find any footage at all, so I don't know if it was crowded or not. But in Monk's book, he does say a few interesting things about this gig. He said that it was kind of a listless gig. He said that most of the band members were kind of up all night on the bus, and they were kind of, he thinks, getting sick of each other and tired. So he didn't think it was one of the best dates on the tour. And apparently at some point during the show, a punk girl gets up on stage and starts taking Sid's pants off, and he lets her, and then the security have to kind of pull her off. And then after the show, she goes up to him at the bar, not backstage, but at the bar where people are still milling around and the press, and she starts to take his pants off again and starts giving him oral sex. And at that point, I think Allison, the security guy, and Monk, they go crazy, and they get the girl off of him, and they take them backstage where they can finish whatever they're doing. And Monk says in the book as well that Sid confided in him that he thought he had some venereal disease that he got from a girl, not from Nancy, but from another girl before he got to the States. And he says to Monk, "Oh, I keep itching, Monk. It's just awful." And then Monk said, "Well, you might have crabs." And he says, "Oh, am I going to die?" And then Monk says, "No, but you should get it taken care of." And then later in the tour, Monk said that he got really upset with Sid because he did have crabs, and they, I don't know, I guess they're little bugs, and some of them got on some of Monk's clothing, not while he was wearing it, but a pile of clothing of his, because they were rooming together, and so he was really upset about that. And he had a joke he would joke with his friend Allison that Sid was opening up franchises around America. In other words, he was spreading his disease in every city, and I guess that was maybe one of them. So, and Monk also says that Malcolm had a sort of a mini press conference, I think in his hotel room, and he starts hinting at the press that he wants to take the band to South America after the tour. And he also mentions maybe Puerto Rico, but he mentions South America after the tour. So that was the events of the fourth date on the tour. And then at sometime in the middle of the night, after the show, probably around 2 a.m., they get on the bus again for the night drive back to Texas, and this time for the Fish show, which was at the Longhorn Ballroom in Dallas. All right, so January 10th, they arrive in Dallas, and that's for the Fish show on the tour, and they're playing the Longhorn Ballroom, which is a famous country and western venue. This is the second show that I went to. We didn't go, my friend and I, we didn't go to Baton Rouge. We should have. I mean, should have gone to all the shows if we could have. And because we didn't have a car, and going to Louisiana just seemed, I don't know, very hard to do with bus transportation. So we just concentrated on going to the next show in Texas, which was this one in Dallas at the Longhorn Ballroom. And they checked into the Greenleaf Hotel, and I don't know. I think he says a bit about that night on the bus. I think it was pretty uneventful. And one thing I forgot to mention that the photographer, he's a famous photographer, Bob Gruen, and some of the photos I'm showing here are from him. He was on the bus. I'm not sure he was on the bus all the time, but he was definitely traveling with them on the bus. So he got some great photos, and Monk says that he thought Malcolm was kind of an odd manager because he wouldn't travel on the bus. He and Rory Johnston would fly from gig to gig, and he thought that he was a very kind of remote, or not very involved in the day-to-day runnings of the band. He didn't seem to care about Sid's problems, or he didn't seem to care about the sound quality. He was just struck by how sort of hands-off he was, and he didn't think that was necessarily a good thing. But anyway, but I remember this as being a great gig, very similar to San Antonio. It was full of a lot of guys that hated the band, and the capacity, I don't know if I mentioned, was 1,900, so that's a pretty big club. And I remember it was pretty packed. And as I say in my video that I did last year, Malcolm came up to my friend and I in the parking lot, and he had seen us at the Randy's Rodeo show, and he said, "You don't have to pay," and he whisked us in a side door. He was so sweet. And but yes, it didn't quite have the level of violence as the San Antonio gig. They weren't allowed to have cans, so they could only throw paper cups. And But I thought it was a great show, despite the fact that all the people, or most of the people in the audience, didn't like the band. So here's another clip from DOA from that night, January 10th, at the Longhorn Ballroom.
Came here, I had definite opinions, and I suppose they were very negative about the Sex Pistols. I've been here and I've talked to a lot of people. Those opinions have changed drastically now from negative to sort of a mellow type situation. And really, I guess now all I can do is the only thing that we are supposed to do as news reporters, and that's to wait and see what happens.
I didn't know who they were until the people started telling us, the morning news and the Times there, and everybody called us, hey, you got the Sex Pistols. And I said, yeah, I guess so. Who are they? They said, well, they're a controversial group. They do this and they do that and they do this. They call me home, and they kind of upset me. And then the public started calling us, and I was rather disturbed about it. Tried to cancel it, I tried very hard, but they told me there would be 3 lawsuits if I canceled it, and I said, well...
I love that show. I thought it was just great. They all looked and sounded so amazing, and I didn't quite see how Sid got bloody. I thought he hit his head on the microphone, but according to Monk, there was a girl in the audience named Jolene who played a part in the tour, and apparently she was the one that bloodied his nose, or maybe, I don't know if it was accidentally. I know that there was a couple girls on his side of the stage that were from LA. One was Helen Killer, another was named Trudy. But this wasn't, he says her name was Jolene. And so after the show, Sid wanted to go home with her, oh God. And right when he's getting in the car, he said that she had a beat up old VW. He's getting in the car, and literally they're pulling away, and Monk is running after them, but the car is kind of skidding on the ice. It was cold in Texas that month, and he is able to reach in and get the keys and throw them in the snow. And Sid was upset because she had a couple girls with her, and he said to Monk, "Oh, but they want a party." And Monk's rule with Sid was, it's okay if you want to have sex or do whatever you want, but you have to do it where I know where you are. You can't be going off to people's houses. And he tried to be, I think, strict with all the members of the band. He told them at the beginning of the tour, no hard drugs, but alcohol and pot's fine. And I just have to know where you are at all times. That was kind of his rule. So they get Sid out of her car and get him back to the bus, and he gives her directions to the hotel. He said, Sid, he doesn't use these words, but he says, Sid wants to be with you. Here's the directions to the hotel. So he gave her directions to the Greenleaf Hotel, and they spent the night together. I guess he had an adjoining room with Sid, so it wasn't like they were in the same room, but he always made sure he had an adjoining room with Sid. So he spent the night with this girl, spreading his VD, or opening up another franchise, as the security put it, and then Monk was woken up about 3 a.m, and Sid was pounding on the wall, and I guess he had purchased some brass knuckles, and he was pounding on the wall with his brass knuckles. So that ended the night of their Fish show, which was in Dallas, Texas. And from there, they went to Tulsa. Yeah, so they spent the night in Dallas, and then the next day, January 11th, they left for Tulsa, which is about 260 miles to the north. And as I said, my friend Sue and I, we didn't have a car, but she had corresponded with the guy who lived in Arkansas, and I'll show a picture of him here with Sid. Sid doesn't look very well in this photo. And he was able to go to a few shows because if you're in Arkansas, he probably went to Memphis, Baton Rouge, and Dallas, and Tulsa. That's my guess. So anyway, she had corresponded with him, and we started talking to him after the show, and he gave us a ride that night, right after the gig. He gave us a ride to Tulsa, so that was great. And then we shared a hotel room, and then the next day, that was as I said, January 11th. We woke up early, and we went to the Cain's Ballroom, where the gig was going to be later. It was only in the afternoon, I think. And I talk about this in my personal video. And Malcolm saw us, and he got us in. He said, "Oh, you girls are following us." And he gave me a backstage pass, which I still have. Yeah, so Malcolm, he was so sweet. He recognized us from the Dallas show and the San Antonio show. And he gave us a backstage pass. And hopefully the camera can pick that up. And he signed it MC. I think it says video on it, and dated January 11th. So glad I kept that. So we saw the sound check. There was quite a few, maybe about 10 press people there, probably including Bob Gruen. There was another photographer named Roberta Bailey. I've since know that now. And I thought they sounded great at the sound check. It was hard because, being a fan, I just wanted to run up and start dancing in front of them. But I kept my cool and sat in the back and with everyone else. So it was a great sound check. They ran through quite a few songs, and I thought Sid played great. I mean, I thought I know there's been speculation that he didn't even play the bass on the tour, but I heard the sound check, and he was definitely he definitely played bass on the tour, and I think he did just fine. So I'll play a clip here again from the movie DOA, a brief clip of the show in Tulsa on January 11th. If I didn't mention already, the capacity for Kane's Ballroom was 1,200, and it wasn't that crowded. I think it was maybe like half full, so maybe about 600 people were there. Nothing like the Texas shows. The people were, I think, just curiosity seekers and fans. There was quite a few fans. And it was a great show. This is one of my favorite. This was my favorite on the tour because I could get so close, and it was just really just a celebration of their music. I loved it. So here's a brief clip of that show, January 11th at Kane's Ballroom.
It never came from God, it came from the stinking devil. Your last name never has to be rotten, it can be beautiful and you'll get Jesus. Jesus will take all the rottenness out of this world and make it beautiful. The devil's the one whose name is rotten. Jesus will make their life beautiful, man. Every piece of rottenness you ever see. Punk rock is just a thermometer of our inward condition. Sin isn't something that we do, but sin is a disease that's passed on.
For my kicks. I'm out here to share life, man. Jesus. That's what I'm doing. That's the truth, man. Well, give us a ring. BR52561, man. Be cool.
I love that gig. It was so great. And I did walk out and look at that sign that those people had before the show, and I thought it was actually quite clever. What is it? Life is rotten without your only begotten Jesus. So anyway, they were out there protesting, and but yeah, I just thought it was a great show, and I'll show just a couple of my personal photos here because I had the backstage pass. We could stay after the show, which was such a great thing. And this is a photo here. It was in Hit Parader magazine. This is me dancing right in front of Sid there. I'm wearing a seditionary sweater. I had black hair back then. It was a little bit wavy. And a picture here, me with Paul Cook, and then a couple pictures of me with Steve, and he kissed me before we left. He was so sweet. They were all so friendly. Leiden, Johnny did not come out, and I don't know if he just didn't want to meet people, but he apparently stayed backstage or in the bus after the show. And I always love Steve's jacket that he's wearing here in this picture with me. He wore that jacket a lot on the tour, that red jacket. And it's funny, I saw an interview recently on Gary Kemp's podcast, and Gary asked him, whatever happened to that red jacket? I love questions like that. And Steve says, I don't know, I lost it a long time ago. But he did say to Gary Kemp that that red jacket actually used to be Sid's jacket, and they had traded jackets before the tour, and Steve gave Sid his leather jacket from America. So that must have been the jacket that I brought to him from Rory Johnston. And so Steve was wearing Sid was wearing the jacket that I had brought from LA, and Steve was wearing the red jacket that he got from Sid. Just an interesting detail. I like stuff like that. And then, but it was great. Everyone was so friendly, and then I did say just a brief hello to Sid as he walked by, and he was with what I thought was a transvestite. It didn't even look like a transgender. It was definitely a man dressed as a woman, and they go walking by arm in arm, and we were chatting with some people, and the worst person we were chatting with, he was from Tulsa, and he said, he's the biggest drug dealer in town. So I thought, okay, that makes sense. And Monk writes quite a bit about this person in his book. He said that Sid, I'll just say her, Sid spotted her in the audience and said, hey, I want her after the show, Monk. You have to get her for me. And so after the show, Monk went up to her and said, Sid wants to be with you. So, and she didn't have a car, so apparently she rode back with the band back to the hotel. They were staying at the Holiday Inn in Tulsa. And I'll just read a brief quote here. Cook nudges Jones. This is in Monk's book. Looks like Sid got himself one big bird tonight. And then Steve says, I don't know, he's got himself something. So he took this person back to the hotel, and Monk had an adjoining room with Sid again, so he could, close the door, I guess, but they had two rooms that were sort of together. And then afterwards, Sid knocks on the door and says, oh, she's leaving or something, and she's got to go, and Monk walks in there, and anyway, Monk said it was definitely she was definitely male. She still had her male parts, and then Sid said to him, well, he says, I didn't really know what to do. And then he this book is quite graphic. He goes into graphic detail of what he didn't quite know what to do, because she was still a man, and she had to leave because apparently she was also a stripper. So off she went, and then Sid said to Monk, oh, I still want to party. And then apparently, I think his name is John Holstrom from the magazine Punk. He was having a little get together in his room. He had called up Monk, and then Sid says, oh, I want to go there. I want to go. And so they went to his room, and the photographer Roberta Bailey was there, and apparently there were several girls there, and Sid ended up getting with a second person that night. This one was female, and he took her back to the room afterwards. And then Monk said that he and I think he was with the security person, his friend Allison, and they were both woken up in the early hours of the morning when the girl was screaming, oh my God, and they run into the room, and Sid had vomited. It's quite sad, actually. Sid had vomited all over her, and then there was also diarrhea covering the bed. So she was very upset, and she was running to the shower screaming. So he was he was not in good shape at all. So so that's how that night ended, January 11th in Tulsa. And actually, it was the morning of January 12th. And that morning, as I put in my personal video, my friend Sue and I, we were at the airport in Tulsa, and I remember seeing some of the press people there at the airport. I didn't see the members of the band. And that morning, January 12th, Rory and Steve and Paul and Malcolm, they all took flights directly to San Francisco. And that was so because 2 days later, January 14th, would have been the show at Winterland. And but Sid and Johnny, they decided that they wanted to stay with Monk and with the bus driver and whatever security was there, and they wanted to stay on the bus, and they wanted to see America. So they took off. They actually went to LA first, and at this point, Monk says in his book that Sid was actually in a good mood. Maybe he'd probably gotten heroin from the transvestite, that's what I'm guessing, but he said that he was in a better mood, and he and Johnny were getting along, but it was just the two of them. And I think looking back, I think that was, the band was so fragmented with Steve and Paul. They were such a tight unit and very loyal to Malcolm, whereas Sid and Johnny were kind of on their own there, not quite as, it wasn't a cohesive group. You learn that when you read this book. It wasn't cohesive at all. But they said they had fun, and they had two drivers, so they were able to make that trek to LA. So that was the next phase of the tour. Yeah, so on January 12th, Sid and Johnny stay on the bus, and they decide they want to see LA, which is a really long way. From Tulsa, Oklahoma to LA is 1,500 miles. And I'm surprised they made it so quickly, but apparently the driver had a backup driver. And they made it. They left, I don't know what time they left January 12th, but they pulled into LA around 8:30 at night on January 13th. And they stayed at the Holiday Inn in Woodland Hills, if anybody wants to know those details. And Sid takes a bath, which Monk says several times was very infrequent, much to the dismay of himself and maybe a lot of the other people. And so they decide that night to hit the Sunset Strip. And Monk has a contact at the Whiskey, a go-go, and they arrange for them to go there. They have a VIP table and drinks. I'll show a photo here of them outside the Whiskey on January 13th. And Monk says that they kind of behave like rock stars. He said they were kind of disinterested in whatever band was playing, and they just were I don't know, drinking. And then he said that they decided they wanted to go up the street to the Roxy, and they go to the Roxy, and the band, I don't know what the name of the band was playing, but it had Hunt and Tony Sales in it, the Soupy Sales Sons, and they're quite famous in their own right. They've worked with Bowie and Iggy quite a bit, and apparently they liked that band, and at one point Sid got up on stage, and I don't know if he tried to play bass or he was dancing around, and then security had to tell him to get off the stage, and Johnny was kind of annoyed with him. But that's kind of interesting. I didn't really know that till I read Monk's book, that they were kind of hopping around the Sunset Strip on January 13th, 1970, 1978. And then they had a big gig the next day, of course, Winterland. And so right around 3 a.m., the morning of January 14th, they headed to San Francisco for that final gig. So their tour bus arrives January 14th at 10 a.m. in San Francisco, and they stay at the Cavalier Motel, and Monk calls it a slum pit near the San Francisco airport, whereas the rest of the band, with Rory and Malcolm, are staying at the Miyako, which is, I've stayed there. It's a nice hotel downtown. So I'm sure that didn't make Johnny and Sid feel very good. And so yeah, they arrived at 10 a.m. and then after that they did an interview for KSAN, a radio station there. I think that radio station actually filmed or recorded the concert. And the concert was recorded by Warner Brothers. They filmed it, so I think that's a pretty accessible video to see. And it's interesting because Monk in his book says that he felt like the show was blasé. He felt like the band didn't really have it anymore, and he said that it wasn't as exciting as the dates in Texas. He said it was dull beyond belief. And then, of course, at the end of the show, and he also says that Boogie turned Sid's amp off. So that's kind of interesting. And he goes on to say that yeah, he didn't think it was the best show of the tour at all. He thought it was one of their worst gigs of the tour. And I wish I went to it. Looking back, I think, God, why didn't I? Especially since I knew Rory. He told me afterwards he would have given me a backstage pass. But at the time, my friend Sue and I, airplane tickets were very expensive, and to change the flights and get a hotel in San Francisco, and I think she was working and had to get back to work, so I don't know. And also, we didn't know it was the last tour. It was, so tragic. In retrospect, I should have gone, but I didn't. It was their biggest show, of course. Winterland has a capacity of, I believe it's 5,400, and 5,400 capacity, and it was sold out, of course. And the two bands that opened up were very good punk bands in the area. The Nuns went on first. I love the Nuns. And then the Avengers. And apparently the Avengers weren't that well known, but they went on just before the Pistols because Rory Johnston knew them. And I think he went on later to manage them. But according to Monk, it was his least favorite show. And then, of course, after the show, everything went downhill. Johnny found out about Malcolm's plans to go to Brazil, which he didn't want any part of. And according to Monk, the girl Jolene that Sid had been with in Dallas, the girl that wanted to get him in her VW, she turned up. Apparently, she lived in San Francisco. And he went over to her apartment and got high. He got high on heroin at her apartment. So he disappeared after the show. But Johnny didn't. He went to Malcolm's room at the Miyako and kind of had a showdown with him and didn't understand what was happening. He didn't want to go to Brazil. I mean, I don't blame him. I thought it was a kind of a silly idea. And then so they had sort of a big powwow at 2 a.m. in Malcolm's hotel room. According to Monk in his book, when Johnny met with Malcolm in the hotel room, he thought he was being sacked from the band because they'd kind of kept him out of the loop as far as what was happening. And Malcolm said, "No one wants to sack you. Come with us to Brazil and stay in the band." And then Johnny said, if you wanted me to go to Brazil, why didn't you tell me? It was an oversight. And then Johnny says, you can shove the oversight anywhere with you lot, and he leaves the room. And then he tells Monk at the hotel bar, I'm bloody well fed up and disgusted. The band is over. So quite sad. That was 2 a.m. at the Miyako Hotel after their last gig, January 14th. And I really think that if Steve and Paul had maybe banded together a little more with Johnny, the band would have continued. But I think their loyalty was to Malcolm at that point, and I think their attitude was he's gotten them this far, and so why go against him? Apparently, Monk said that Rory wanted the band to stay on the bus and go back to the East Coast and do the dates that had been canceled. So maybe he wasn't that keen on Brazil either. But anyway, Malcolm had his way, and Steve and Paul went to Brazil, of course, to record with Ronnie Biggs, and that was that. So afterwards, Monk and Johnny went back to the motel by the airport in the early hours of January 14th. The next day, January 15th, Monk says that Johnny had about 20 conversations with Malcolm on the phone, and he said it was kind of more like shouting matches. So this is, that was pretty much it. Apparently, Johnny said, it just goes from one circus to another. I'm not interested anymore. And then he slams the phone down for the last time. That was around 6 p.m. January 15th. And then Monk gets the call from the record company that the tour is over, and he needs to get the bus and get his crew together, and that's it. It's no more tour. So I'm sure he was sad. And then Monk had a farewell dinner with Johnny in Chinatown. I think at this point, Sid, I think they found him at the girls' apartment, but I'm not sure he saw Sid anymore. Sid was kind of gone at that point. But he had a farewell dinner with with Johnny, and Johnny told him that Rory arranged for him to stay at the Miyako Hotel so he could get out of the motel by the airport. So after that, January 15th, he checked into the Miyako and stayed there a few days. So that's nice. So yeah, the last day, 6 p.m., Monk has dinner with Johnny, and he gives him a present. I think it was some kind of button. And Monk says, well, that's it then, I'm off. And then Johnny said, this isn't the way it was supposed to end. And they say goodbye. And yeah, that's sad. Who would have thought that would have been the end of the band, that incarnation of the band. And the band wouldn't get together, of course, with Glenn until 1996. So sad, tragic ending. I still get sad when I think of it. They should have kept going. I always thought they would have released a second album in the next year or two after that. So, but I'm glad for this book. If you like to read like firsthand accounts of rock and roll, it's a good book written by Monk, the guy who was there every minute on the tour, and yeah, and Lydon said that famous line at the end, never get the feeling you've been cheated. I don't get the feeling I was cheated. I feel like I saw the best band in my generation, and I feel like I saw them at an interesting time, a pivotal time, and the shows were, it's funny that Monk's favorite shows were the Texas shows. Those were the most crazy shows, and I love them too. So I don't feel cheated at all. So hope you like this video, kind of a companion piece to the video I did a year ago. And I'll end the video with a compilation of clips from that infamous tour that was 47 years ago this month. Thanks for watching. Until the next time, I'll be seeing you.